Welcome to Two Point Hospital over at the Edge of Casual. I am your host Verso, and I'm just going to offer my knee-jerk impressions based upon my first few hours spent with this game. So, a lot of new games are inspired by older games, right? So, for example, I recently released a first impressions video for Project High Rise, which is a tower building game somewhat in the mold of the classic Sim Tower. But, these games usually they kind of put their own spin on things or place these mechanics in the context of a fresh aesthetic or whatever. They stake their claim within the genre space somehow. And then there are games like Two Point Hospital, which are, and I say this with no judgment whatsoever, essentially they are remakes. So Two Point Hospital is without a doubt a lovingly crafted updating of the late 90s title Theme Hospital, which is an absolute classic management game released by the long defunct Peter Molyneux company Bullfrog Productions. And I would say that Theme Park and Theme Hospital were two of my favorite games from around the time that I got my first PC. And, maybe combined with like Civilization 2 and The Sims were probably responsible for turning me fully into a PC gamer, since I had always been a console gamer growing up. Anyway, the point is, the care with which Two Point Hospital exactly evokes the classic Theme Hospital experience, and though it is, it's probably been 20 years since I played that game, but that is not lost on me. So I should say it's not even subtle. The developers, they're not trying to pretend that they weren't making this game to scratch the itch of gamers like me. Though I think the fact that this stands so well on its own, even amongst modern management titles, is a testament to how solid Theme Hospital's core gameplay was even back in the day. And, good games are good games in any decade, so enough said. But anyway, let's move on from retrospective and actually talk a little bit about Two Point Hospital itself. I'm going to get a bit of a gripe out of the way first and say that I'm the sort of player who usually doesn't play much of the campaign in games like these. I'll typically jump right into the sandbox, and you can't do that here. And actually, I didn't think there was a sandbox mode at all in Two Point Hospital, but in preparing for this video, I discovered that there allegedly is one, and it was added post-release actually, but it only becomes available after completing the first 3 levels of the campaign, if I'm understanding correctly. And I mean, that's fine, but the campaign plays sort of like a protracted tutorial in the sense that what you're allowed to unlock at each level is restricted by your location. So this gates your progress and ensures that you've learned what you're supposed to have learned before they give you full access to the toy box. And that makes sense, and it's probably for the best, though, from my perspective, sometimes trial by fire can be fun. So anyway, and just real fast, while the various treatment rooms and so forth unlock through gameplay, most of everything else, like all the non-essential items that go inside rooms, those unlock through something called kudosh, I guess you'd say, kind of like kudos, but with an H, I don't know why. But that's kind of like a special currency earned in the game through reputation gains, I think. In truth, I never really paid very close attention to how I was gaining it. A lot of this feeds into the room prestige rating, which, again, I'm not totally sure why room prestige is important yet. It's only a few of the items actually have any direct effect on the room's efficiency stats, unless prestige also affects efficiency for all I know. And I guess I arguably know very little at this point. So anyway, the first location keeps it pretty simple for you. So primarily it does this by limiting the array of diseases with which patients will enter your building. So for example, there are no psychiatric patients at all. It's all just physical ailments at the first location, most of which are cured at the pharmacy. Only one of which, I believe, lightheadedness, requires a specialized treatment room. This feels like a good opportunity to make this clear if it wasn't already. There's nothing realistic at all about Two Point Hospital, at least I don't think so. In truth, I know very little about how actual hospitals are managed. The only time I've ever really spent in hospitals was when my 2 kids were born. But I'm going to go out on a limb and say that even apart from the comical afflictions like people having light bulbs for heads, Two Point Hospital, just like Theme Hospital before it, probably is not interested in accurately recreating the hospital experience. It's really all just in good fun. So, moving on. The heart of the hospital is the general practitioner, so it probably makes sense to kind of put these right in the center of your buildings. And these are the people who are making the diagnoses, writing the prescriptions, and so forth. So every patient filters through here first. And in the first location, you can get away with probably only having one of them, really. But what I discovered is that by the time you get to the second location, Lower Bullocks, you're going to need a lot of GP offices, because even though you can gather patient data through rooms like the general diagnosis room or the wards, patients always have to cycle back to the GP or additionally, once you get to the second location, the psychiatrist, to make things official. In other words, nurses are good up to a point, but eventually all of the patients have to come back to a doctor. So, as you can imagine, queues build up pretty quickly for these rooms. And by the way, queues, or more specifically patient flow, I guess, are kind of the main challenge in 2 Point Hospital from what I've seen. And maybe it's simply because I'm still at what is essentially the tutorial phase, but I have had zero problems thus far with my balance sheet, reputation, patient or staff happiness, or any of these things. It's really only ensuring that I have the proper ratio of facilities to handle the incoming patients. And honestly, in that regard, I'm still attempting to wrap my head around all of this, because patients will keep entering regardless of whether you have the capacity to handle them, or even the rooms to handle them for that matter. Rooms are built instantly, so that's not a problem. So the issue for me is really just space and organizing things in an efficient way. A minor frustration for me is that you don't get to define the footprint of your building. I mean, you can't even move windows around, let alone the exterior doors. So you have to work with the space that you have. And I don't know, sometimes it's just not the space that I want, but there's sort of a low cost to messing things up because rooms can be moved around, resized, etc., without too much of a headache. Obviously, there are other balls to juggle, for example, hiring staff and making sure that you pick the ones with the skills that you need while minimizing negative traits. And you can even go into the staff management and micromanage who works where, but I've been a bit too lazy to do this, though I probably should because it would probably be pretty beneficial to my hospital's efficiency. Speaking of staff, you've got doctors, just to go through these, who serve as GPs, psychiatrists, and staff the specialized equipment. Nurses, which work in the pharmacy, wards, general diagnosis rooms, probably other places that I'm forgetting. Janitors, which are really like a general upkeep position since they maintain equipment and even bust ghosts on top of cleaning the toilets. And basic assistants who handle the customer service stuff like your reception desk and kiosks. One of the best things I can say about 2 Point Hospital is that everything seems at this point to be very straightforward. Yes, there are stats everywhere if you go looking for them, from the overall hospital stats on your management screeners to the individual stats on each employee with regard to things like how many diagnoses they've made, how many patients they've inadvertently killed, that sort of thing. And then there are the sundry visualization modes that you can use to assess things like your hospital's attractiveness, staff energy levels, and so forth. In the early game, though, you can pretty safely ignore all of this, and I have for the most part, so it's really only there if you want it. Things seem to largely take care of themselves as long as you make sensible decisions, and 2 Point Hospital doesn't seem to be unnecessarily punishing in the way that some other games might be, where, like, for example, a customer might absolutely refuse to walk more than, I don't know, like 10 squares to get a drink of water from the fountain, even if they're dying of thirst, that sort of thing. I kind of hate that stuff in management games. I mean, I'm guessing a bit here about what the later game is going to look like, just based upon the fact that 2 Point Hospital is very, very lighthearted and funny. Probably not terribly interested in seeing players drive themselves crazy attempting to min-max everything to death. Though I could be wrong about that, and we'll see. Though honestly, I don't even remember seeing a difficulty setting at any point yet. My assumption is that difficulty is based upon hospital location, though one of many things which I'll eventually find out. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and end it here. I've really only provided a general overview of the game in this video, but what I hope you noticed is that I haven't had anything particularly negative to say about 2 Point Hospital, and that's because the early experience with this game is extremely casual friendly, very appropriate to this channel, actually, and it's really charming and funny. The devs have done right by old school theme hospital fans, and I'm really happy that they're bringing this experience to a new generation, like my 8-year-old daughter, who often sits and plays games like this with me. And this is a game that can really be appreciated by anybody, I think, and I look forward to seeing what the mid-game is like. Anyway, questions and comments below as usual, and in the meantime, thanks for watching, and keep it casual.